Good evening. This is Link Season Master, self-proclaimed crazy person and goofball extraordinaire. Well, I just got back from seeing Ghostbusters Afterlife, and wow, this was just about everything I could have wanted in a sequel to the movies, to the first two movies. Now, for the record, I do have some familiarity with the movies. Like, I very much enjoyed the first one, and the second one, I've only seen it once, but I have mixed feelings towards it. Like, I don't think it's as bad as people have made it out over the years, but I definitely don't feel like the second movie really hit its stride until the trial. Then there was the attempted reboot from 5 years ago that I haven't seen yet. I know some people have boycotted it from principle or something, and those that have seen it have had also mixed feelings towards it, but honestly, I do feel like the advertising campaign could have used some work. But what I really do like about this film, Afterlife, is that, and once again, obligatory potential spoiler warning, but this movie definitely handled that bit a lot better. Like, it, that and it, but really, the people who wrote this movie not only love and respect the original, but they're also kind of willing to put a few of their own spins on things while changing aspects. And honestly, I feel like now the first one is a classic. No matter what, it's always a classic, and its soundtrack was also incredible. This one soundtrack was okay, wasn't as great or as memorable as the original, but I feel like and well, I do find this movie was also really funny, but it wasn't that wasn't the primary focus. It was actually really character driven. Like, don't get me wrong, all the characters are hilarious, and the jokes they do the original justice. But they also weren't really afraid to really flesh these characters out a bit, for the most part. I do feel like Lucky, like Winston in the first movie, kind of got the short end of the stick in that department, but they really do know their stuff, and they really do care. Like, there's a lot of Ghostbusters lore out there that I know I'm not familiar with. Like, there's the two cartoons, which I haven't seen. I have heard good things about them. I've There's also been a bunch of video games. Some the Angry Video Game Narrative covered. Some that, if memory serves, I own a copy of on Steam, but it's been delisted and I don't know if it's any good or not. But I really liked the way they handled their characters. Like, especially like the first act really the first half really, like if you're going by a three-act structure, like first two-thirds like really do a good job of not only fleshing out these characters, but they're all really believable. Like, I've never been to a summer school, but Mr. Gruberson is definitely a well, he's basically the Lewis equivalent in this movie, and a bit about Lewis later, but he's definitely a lot smarter than Lewis. He's definitely he's a lot he's also pretty darn but he's still very endearing. He's definitely a dork. But and I just love the fact that he lets these kids during his house watch Stephen make horror movies, but for the most part the kids don't even true they're 12 they're supposed to be 12-year-olds, but they don't really bat an eye, and that was one of the other things that it's not weird, but I kind of appreciate about this film. Like that is not the kind of thing you should be doing. At least not in school. But here's the thing. Look, I doubt this is common for kids nowadays, and I don't even know if it was common for kids when I was in school. But I didn't even know what swear words were never until I was 10. And I didn't really start cursing until I was about to finish college. I'm better than I was my final year of college, but I do still swear from time to time. Like in my last live stream, which I'm kind of kicking myself for, but even if I even if I might be being too hard on myself, but anyway, these these kids, a lot of kids do seem to learn these words a lot earlier than I did, and they and just snapping it, and even the parent adults around them sometimes swear too. But the film tries it doesn't really well, it doesn't say it's a good thing. It doesn't overreact about these kids swearing either, or even making some dirty jokes, because that's the thing. A lot of kids, especially when they're 12 or older, or sometimes even a little younger, they're a lot more familiar about this stuff, at least in my experience, once they hit a certain age than we may give them credit for. And yeah, that's not the kind of thing they should really be saying in public and all that stuff. But they yelling at them for cursing, that's not going to help them. Gotta talk to them, make it clear that, like in a calm way, and just say like, look, those aren't the kind of words you really should be throwing around casually. Like, we're not perfect, adults aren't perfect, and the film shows that. Like, that's another solid thing I think this film showed is that young or old, people make mistakes, even parents. And some of them really are caring. But these kids are. But you gotta make it, like, at least in real life. And the film doesn't really. Like, the way to really, if you don't want kids to swear too much, is you gotta just make it clear, like, be careful. Try to show some restraint. Because if you don't, you're gonna slip at the worst possible time. Like, say, during a wedding or a funeral. Yeah, those are kind of the places you don't want to be swearing. If you are going to swear, be very careful about it. And even then, just try to show some restraint. But that's the thing. A lot of kids are going to know about this stuff. So it shows that kids, especially from a younger age, are either amateurish at, like, they're aspiring, like, vloggers or YouTube or social media stars. Like, they put effort into recording and all that stuff. Like, podcast is so. I could easily see him in some of the schools I've worked in. And you probably at a younger age, but I could easily see him in those settings. And Phoebe, like, okay, she and her brother Trevor, like, they're great. Like, both of them clearly show signs of being Egon's grandkids without actually, well, being pure carbon copies of them. Like, I did sometimes have a bit of a hard time buying that their mom. Sorry, my camera was being a little weird, but I sometimes did have a little bit of a hard time buying their mom being being Egon's daughter. But I definitely bought her being her parents' kids. I mean being her kid's parent, as well as her kids being Egon's grandkids. Like, Phoebe is definitely her own person. She's definitely puts in more effort than Egon did to try to be social and whatnot, and she has a bit more success than he did. But well, like her grandfather, she definitely showed signs of being on the spectrum, as well as when she was first confronted with, like, she was initially skeptical about the supernatural because she didn't know her family legacy. But once she's confronted with blatant evidence that it's happening, she just takes it in stride the way her grandfather would have. And even playing a bit of chess with him, which is it's kind of funny and kind of heartwarming too. Like the way she just took it in stride. Like podcast was very entertaining, and while he definitely trying. And I also think Trevor was just a really good big brother, and honestly a pretty good son too. Like his first instinct when they get to this town, like without his mom even being obvious, telling him that they're like the trailers made it clear, and it was like he just knew his family was in trouble. What's his first instinct to do? Get a part-time job. Like, true, probably being smitten with Lucky didn't was also for that, but he genuinely was working hard at his job. He didn't. Like, yes, he picked the place because of Lucky, but he didn't let that be. He didn't let that be the only reason. Like, he was in his own way trying to help his family. And when he's gets caught up in his sister's adventures, like he's not as interested or even as book smart as her, but he also shows some pretty cleverness too, like how towards the end he energy how instead of trying to attack the actual spirit, he basically overcharges the trap so it'll actually reactivate. Because yeah, it had a lot of power issues. Like also like I just found the teacher, Mr. Gruberson, to be very entertaining. He really shouldn't have been letting these kids see these movies, but I'm also not surprised that the kids didn't bat an eye to them. Because I think maybe it wasn't the case in my generation, but I just get the sense a lot of these kids could be a fair number of them would be kind of desensitized. But definitely not something you should have been doing, but I'm also not surprised by the reaction. And I don't know how to feel about that. But it was also a sign to me that the people who wrote this movie, like all these kids, were really believable. Like they really felt like high school and middle school children, especially modern days. Like in some ways, I feel like it was kind of like I saw a film called Eighth Grade a few years back. Where apparently the kids who acted in that film also played a role in writing the script. Like they wrote it in a way that actually sounded like how they talked, which and then so either something similar happened here, or the film writers either have kids who are, especially with some of the stuff, like just how kind of relevant some of the stuff they're talking about, like as far as like their familiarity with certain stuff and whatnot. Like either they have kids who are in high school and middle school, or they have spent time on the front lines in these schools. Because, yeah, I've done that. I worked on the front lines, and it honestly felt pretty darn believable. And I also just, I'm not, I've got mixed feelings about them reusing Gozar, but they had some fun with it. Like, it wasn't just copy and paste. Like they played around with the behavior, some of the quips, and it was also just kind of nice seeing a Ghostbusters movie in a more of a less than in a non-city section setting, like in the kind of places where you totally would like. If you really think about it, you don't often hear about a lot more haunted house stories, well, out in the boonies than you would in a city. Like, yeah, you'll hear occasional ghost stories in like more urban areas, but there's a reason you hear more about like more UFO sightings and all that stuff out in the middle of nowhere. So I think they took advantage of that. But nonetheless, something like it was really nice seeing two generations of Ghostbusters, new and old, working together as equals. Not one as being the older generation wasn't immediately superior due to being well experienced vets. They've kind of yes, but they're also all of them are effective because the four of them one of them is deceased and the other three are effectively retired, and so they're going to be a bit rusty. And the new generation, well, they're not immediately superior due to being having been kind of on the ball for them. Sorry, I mean one of them gets possessed. They're inexperienced, but the two sides they both have their faults, but they were also able to make up for each other's shortcomings. And that's what I feel like when you're doing this kind of sequel, where it's about really where about it's in respect to the past while also bringing in new blood. If you really want to do this whole passing the torch thing, you gotta have the two Doom teams. Like that's what makes for good crossovers in general. Not one being inherently superior to the other. They both have to have their pros and cons, and that they got to make up for each other's shortcomings and work together. That's how it goes. Now, as I and I really like how like at the end both teams were kind of bonding with one another, and it's showing like there is potential from both factions, if not one or the other, if not just one or the other, to like have more stuff go on in the future. Which I'm glad they showed some hints. Like, yeah, like even if they have other things going on in their lives now, other priorities, they're all still Ghostbusters at heart, and they're always willing to come back. It was also just nice seeing like people have wanted Ghostbusters 3 for decades, and it had a rough time getting off. And I know there were some ideas for it that like originally it was going to be Venkman who was going to play the ghostly mentor. He was going to die, come back as a ghost. That never went anywhere, but because of the passing of the guy who played Egon, like, hold on, his name was Harold Ramis. Like, they took advantage, they paid him proper tribute while taking advantage of that. But they also kind of, in their own ways, kind of acknowledged some of the behind the scenes stuff going on. Like, I don't remember all the, but I know that Harold and Bill Murray apparently they had this big fight, and they didn't want to work together for the longest time. And when they finally started patching things up, Harold passed away shortly afterwards. But they did all do their part, and they showed that there was kind of incorporate aspects, and they're like going like there was some animosity among some of the group towards the end, but they were still able to found ways to put aside their and they still all truly did bond over stuff like this, and I appreciate that. It made it a believable part of Egon's character because he did even in the earlier movies. Like I'm a little surprised that he had kids at all. like, or even let alone grandkids, but he was he was a good he wasn't a bad guy at all. Very socially awkward, but he was a good person. He just was really, really bad at showing it that he cared, that he did the same thing, and it was a big plot, and it was actually a plot element here about here too. Like it led to some massive misunderstandings here. He, but he was trying. He was always trying. He was bad at it, but he was always trying. He never stopped trying, even from beyond the grave. Now, there are, as I said, there are some things I do have some issues with this movie. Like, I do feel like, as I said, I'm a little bummed they kind of just reused Gozar again, but they had fun with it and they tied it into elements from the first movie, which I'm really happy about. I am also, and, and they they also brought in like a Slimer XP, and they reused, but they definitely had some creative ideas with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, which I very much approved. But they had fun with these, but even so, they did slightly different things, and they had some fun with them. So I can't fully hold it against them. Also, as I said, like the soundtrack wasn't bad, but it just wasn't as memorable, except for like when the classic Ghostbusters theme. None of the real original stuff I feel like was as memorable as the rest of that. Like I still remember cleaning up the town, but yeah. Sorry if I'm making some weird gestures. I may have had a little too much to eat for lunch, so apologies for that. But and also I'm going like I do feel like honestly I do feel like Lucky, like Winston in the original movie, Lucky got a bit of the short end of the stick this time around. But I get the sense that if they do have a sequel with this new team, I really hope we get this. I have a feeling they'll be able to do a lot more with her now. Yeah, but yeah, Phoebe was kind of the star of the show, kind of like how Venkman was the first time around. But also, speaking of Venkman, that was also their arrival in the last act. Like, I'm glad they did that. Like, because they helped. They didn't automatically solve the problem for the new team, but their backup was very much needed. They didn't automatically solve it with their rescue, but they helped a lot. Like that's not the part I have an issue with. The issue I have with is I feel like when Phoebe called up Ray, I don't feel like it's clear Ray had some idea where Egon went, but I feel like she didn't give him she like I think it was kind of implied Ray may have had some idea where he went. Like it's clear he had he did have some, but I feel like Peter, and Winston were way too prepared to figure out where the heck they were in the final battle. Like, wow. Like, but I feel like if Phoebe had given them either shown like after the phone call, like maybe they had just shown Ray, like before they cut away, just showing Ray digging through some books to just doing that much would have made me buy it that they managed to actually find the place a little more believable. I do like just show him dig after the phone call, like Just show him digging around in somewhere. Just show that, and I would have totally bought it. But other than that, I think it was a really solid movie. Like, the jokes were just as good as the original, with honestly a little more variety to them. And it was clearly done with love and respect for the source material, while also kind of acknowledging some of its aspects that may not have, well, entertaining, may not be as funny now. Like the blatant favoritism Venkman used at the beginning of the first movie when doing his ESP test. They gave him some good natured ripping and karma for that in the mid credit scene. But it's also just, but yeah, this, when you do a kind of sequel that's set like several years, like not just a few years, but decades after, that's actually set decades after its originals. This is how you do it. You pay love and respect to the source material while still having a little fun picking some ribs, but also introducing your own ideas and concepts and characters and bringing in some new ideas. Like, and I think that's why I. One other thing is, I feel like while we did have a Lewis Exby in this film, Mr. Gruberson, Lewis himself didn't really get a whole lot of acknowledgement here, if any at all. Janine did, or Janine did, or however you pronounce it, but Lewis, not so much. Like, but yeah, if we do get a sequel, which I'm hoping we do, because this film definitely deserves it, I'd love to see what else they do. I do think it there should be more focus in the next, like even more focus in the next film on the new team, especially like some of the guys who really didn't get, maybe some a little more focus on Trevor and Lucky. But I do feel like it would be kind of neat to see like the older team like just have a maybe a bit more of a role this time around in the second film, but if they even choose to come back, but either keep them in a more supporting role. Like don't let them really steal the show from them. Kind of like maybe even more support than what they did here, but still constant presence. Or if they just feel like kind of letting the new team have the whole spotlight. Honestly, at this point, that'd be fine too. But regardless, I think if you're a fan of the original Ghostbusters, or if you have even some fond or guilty pleasure, can even acknowledge the merits of the second one, I think you will be in for a treat with this. Heck, it's making me more than ever want to try to see if I could figure out how to play Ghostbusters on the piano again. Spent my whole senior year of high school learning how to play that. Then I got rusty at it. Oh boy. But anyway, I think that about wraps it up. Sorry, I probably did eat too much. So I do this weird thing where I try to breathe and swallow at the same time, and my body has this weird reaction. But tangent. Anyway, thank you all for listening to me to ramble. Happy third night of Hanukkah. I'm looking forward to seeing you all guys in the next vlog, whichever that may be. So, goodbye. Until next time.